My name is Alexandra. I'm from Aarhus University, currently employed as a research assistant, and I recently graduated from a master's degree in digital living. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me to talk today. And I'll be exploring the links between digital fashion and sustainability with you, which was only a very small part of my master thesis that I wrote about the narratives and the stories that are told about digital clothing and how it is influencing or will influence the future of fashion. This is something that I got into over a year ago and have been intensively researching and been obsessing about since then. And really, during the lockdown, I had been really in a tunnel focusing and writing my thesis on this topic. And it was a great time because that's also when this industry really exploded in terms of B2C and actually the idea of wearing virtual garments on social media platforms, for example. So what I want to start off with is kind of giving you some examples of what I understand as digital clothing, because it can have many interpretations and many forms. But the one that I'm focusing on today or talking about today is when we as humans, so not digital avatars, not in games, not in production, but when influencers or also just humans in everyday life are dressed in digital clothing, like you can see on these pictures, which at the moment mainly happens in a very niche community that posts these images on mostly Instagram, is where images like this are circulated. So I brought three examples. On the left, you can see a garment called Iridescence by the Fabricant, which was actually sold at an auction for $9,500 as kind of a proof of concept that digital garments have a value, or digital assets have a value. The middle garment is by Regina Turbina, who's a great designer from Russia. And I really like what she did here with working with things that are physically impossible in the real life. So this is also a big part of what is possible when you create virtual garments that you're editing onto an image. And the last example is Robau, a brand that emerged at the beginning of the year and launched with this hoodie that they've been selling for, I think it's 40 euros is the price point at the moment. So yeah, I'm talking about digital clothing and how we can wear them. And the angle where I came in kind of and why, or what I'm focusing on today is the aspect of sustainability. So my research interests kind of connect from, as I said, I study digital living. So I'm really interested in digital technologies and how they shape our everyday lives. I'm interested in fashion, and I'm interested in sustainable fashion. So the sustainability aspect and what technologies or what models can shape the fashion industry for the better for both people and our planet, because it really is a big ship to turn around and it has to turn fast. So that's what I would really like to be a part of here when researching this. So yeah, what I found was digital fashion kind of at the intersection of these three topics. And I found it backed up with this narrative that it is like almost the most sustainable option to wear virtual garments. And there was something about this that really intrigued me to look more into it and understand what this is about. So what I brought here is an Instagram story by the Fabricant, which talks about the why digital fashion is a sustainable solution. And maybe to quickly introduce the Fabricant, because I'm going to be showing two examples by them, and I already showed one on the slide before. The Fabricant is a digital fashion house that creates digital fashion only, is their slogan kind of. So no physical production of any clothes. They're producing virtual garments for virtual spaces that you can wear on images, and you can download their files on their website. They're based in Amsterdam. And yeah, they have been really strong in creating narratives for virtual clothes and where they see the future of fashion going with digital clothing. So that's why I brought them as an example, but this is a narrative that you can also find from other actors within the scene. I just brought the Fabricant because it's very clear and visual, and they have very good examples. So I'm just going to go through these examples just to kind of give an overview of what are we looking at when we're comparing physical garments, wearing physical clothes, to digital garments. So in the first slide, they say the global water waste for producing one shirt is 2,700 liters. I don't know whose background is in the fashion industry, but maybe if you've encountered the topic of sustainability in fashion before, you've heard of this immense amount of water use for a single t-shirt. And what they're saying is that the water waste for a digital shirt is absolutely nothing. And you can see that this is a questionnaire here where I answered 1 liter, and this is something that I will come back to later. And if I don't, please remind me. But yeah, so the water waste for producing a digital shirt, according to the Fabricant, is absolutely nothing. So this is definitely a more sustainable solution than wearing a physical t-shirt, if you look at it that way, hypothetically. The second slide says, in the past, a physical retailer would have to show approximately 50 samples to a client. Today, how many would a digital fashion company have to show? Here, the correct answer is 2. So this definitely saves a lot of waste on fabrics and on creating samples when you are designing and going into production, and there's not as much back and forth, and also it saves travel, emissions, and so on. So this is also a very high plus point for using digital samples, 3D samples in fashion design. And the last slide says, what percentage of carbon is saved when producing a digital garment versus a physical garment? And here the answer is 97%, which is obviously very high. Next, I have a post by the Fabricant where you can see that I've underlined 2 things. So the first one says that in an environment that makes the impossible possible, so here they're referring to the idea that we can create garments that we wouldn't be able to create in that way in the physical world. So things that exceed gravity, or materials that we couldn't be able to wear because out of comfort or practicality in real life. So in an environment that makes the impossible possible, that wastes nothing but data and exploits nothing but the imagination, the very idea of physicality seems outdated. So again, they're pushing the narrative that their idea of only creating virtual garments, and that this is the future of fashion. And one argument that they also bring a lot is that there's 2 reasons for wearing clothing. And one reason is the physical aspect, the practical aspect. We have to get dressed every day. We have to keep ourselves warm. And then the second aspect is the emotional aspect, which brings us into trends, which brings us into why we are buying new clothing when our old clothing isn't broken or torn, and why we have such a personal relationship to our clothing, because we express ourselves through it. And here they're talking about wasting nothing but data when you move that emotional level to the digital. So the idea of wearing physical garments for practicality, and wearing virtual garments for the emotional level. And to jump to the last sentence, they also mention here, it's sustainable by its very nature. So this is just to sum up this narrative that I was observing and trying to understand better how exactly digital clothing is the most sustainable option. What does it mean that it wastes nothing but data? What does it mean that it's sustainable by its very nature? All right. So yeah, I was looking more into, maybe this sentence is what really captures it, because they say here themselves, it wastes nothing but data. And this was irritating me. So I wanted to look further into what that means. And I think when we talk about digital fashion, or when we think about digital fashion and digital spaces, it kind of links to this idea that we might also have about the internet, that it's non-physical, that it's immaterial, that it's ephemeral. We can't see it. It doesn't really manifest itself in anything that we connect to it as tangible. But last year, actually, this is supposed to say 2019, not 2020. This was last year, when I went to Transmediale in Berlin, and I went to an exhibition about the internet, and there were all kinds of exhibits on this topic of the internet, which is very broad. But this one is really what kind of caught my eye and led me onto a path of understanding what this means to say digital clothing wastes nothing but data. So on the left side, it says, in order to exist, cyberspace needs equipment and a concrete infrastructure in terrestrial space. With this physical equipment, internet and cyberspace remain solidly anchored in geographical space. The internet is a virtual network built into physical reality. It's a cloud that put down roots into concrete. And I think this is something that we often forget, that the internet is not something that is just floating around, or when we talk about the cloud, it's not something that floats around. It actually manifests itself in physical materials. And on the right side, we can read, where do our communications go? The internet, like the cloud, could appear somewhat hazy and evanescent, but it actually has solid physical and concrete architectural structure. Data does not just disappear into thin air. They are transmitted via optic fiber cables connected to internet boxes, first to the city data center, then to the regional internet exchange point that passes on the information. So here it gets a little bit more clear that the internet, and the point I'm trying to make here is that it also counts for digital clothing, manifests itself in our laptops, in our cables, in the electricity that we use to power this, in the graphics. And on the next slide, I think I have, just a short summary of, this was just a quick brainstorm that I did of all the possible areas where digital fashion manifests itself in material things. So yeah, as I'm saying, it's cables, it's servers, but it's also water that cools down the servers, right? So coming back to that slide where I answered that creating a digital clothing piece, how much water does that use? Is the point where I'm skeptical that it uses absolutely 0% water, because I think we just don't see it. And that's why I find it kind of dangerous to communicate digital fashion in this way. So another thing that helped me wrap my head around this topic was looking at industries that already work in this way, that are already built on a digital infrastructure. And it's also a space where we can find digital fashion already, but we might not consider it digital fashion. And this was the gaming industry. And I just, had a quick look at what the environmental impact of the gaming industry looks like. And these were just a few aspects that I stumbled upon in an article. So it's talking about the electricity use of the devices themselves, which is estimated to sit at 34 terawatt hours of energy each year, which equals 5 million cars. And that sounds pretty wild. There's the hardware that is made of petroleum-based substances. There's obviously also people and the labor behind creating the devices. And there's the internet infrastructure that games are reliant on upon. And this one is quite ironic, because these might be submerged by rising sea levels, which would be the same infrastructures that social media, digital clothing spaces will rely upon as well. So to round up, I kind of came to this idea of the techno-fix, which describes the process of applying a technological solution to solve a problem and to solve a social, environmental, political problem. And what I'm saying in a provoking way is digital fashion is a techno fix, but there should be a question mark behind it, because I do not want to make the argument that digital fashion is useless, that digital fashion should be ignored because we should just give up altogether. I think it is a very valuable way to, like Kata was saying earlier, actually, to integrate it and use it in the right way. But one point that I was making in my thesis, and again, this is only a small excerpt of many different narratives that I was looking into, is that digital garments are not the one fit solution, and that's the way that we can go and we'll be okay. I think if we treat sustainability or a sustainable agenda with genuinity, and this is truly what we're working for, then this also has to be reflected in the way that we talk about our solutions and the way that we communicate these things. And I guess this is linked to transparency, and having radical change comes with that kind of openness and that kind of conversation. So yeah, I find it irritating when just new things come in and it sounds like it is the one-stop perfect solution. So I think this is an aspect about digital clothing, and that I really got into in the past year, and I would like to explore further in what ways digital fashion narratives can be reshaped. And I hope this gave a little insight to a critical side on digital clothing, because yes, there's many exciting sides. And also when we look at production and we look at the industry itself, and how much waste can be saved, how much traveling emissions can be saved, how much time can be saved, there's many great ways to implement the technology behind digital clothing. However, I think when we look at it from a point of view of wearing it in everyday life, and using our phones even more, displaying these digital either augmentations onto our clothing, or posting images of us in digital clothing, that is a whole different aspect of this digital fashion industry that is emerging, where these narratives are really laid open and should be discussed a bit more honestly. I'm happy to answer any questions about this. And thank you. You can check out my Instagram account if you'd like to see more on the other things that I've also been looking into.